Okay, at the end of chapter 5, they just ate in the tower. Wasn't a great meal. They had to grind up those old, dry, stale biscuits in porridge, in hot water, make like porridge. And Jill wished they had tea, and Eustace wished they had cocoa, and Tyrion said he wished they had wine. Chapter 6. A Good Night's Work. About 4 hours later, Tyrion flung himself into one of the bunks to snatch a little sleep. The two children were already snoring. He had made them go to bed before he did because they would have to be up most of the night, and he knew that at their age they couldn't do without sleep. Also, he had tired them out. First, he'd given Jill some practice in archery and found that, though not quite up to Narnian standards, she was really not too bad. Indeed, she had succeeded in shooting a rabbit, not a talking rabbit, of course. There are lots of the ordinary kind about in Western Narnia. And it was already skinned, cleaned, and hanging up. They're probably going to make a stew out of it. He had found that both of the children knew all about this chilly and smelly job of skinning an animal. They'd learned that kind of thing on their great journey through Giant Land in the days of Prince Rilian. Then he had tried to teach Eustace how to use his sword and shield. Eustace had learned quite a lot about sword fighting on his earlier adventures, but that had been all with a straight Narnian sword. He had never handled a curved Calorman scimitar, and that made it hard, for many of the strokes are quite different, and some of the habits he had learned with the longsword now had to be unlearned again. But Tyrion found that he had a good eye and was very quick on his feet. He was surprised at the strength of both children. In fact, they both seemed to be already much stronger and bigger and more grown up than they had been when he first met them just a few hours ago. It is one of the effects which Narnian air often has on visitors from our world. We see that in almost every book, where once they're there for a while and start breathing the Narnian air, they become more Narnian. All three of them agreed that the very first thing they must do was go back to Stable Hill and try to rescue Jewel the unicorn. After that, if they succeeded, then they would try to get away eastward and meet the little army which Runewit the centaur would be bringing from Cair Paravel. That happened a couple chapters ago, if you remember. An experienced warrior and huntsman like Tyrion can always wake up at the time he wants. So he gave himself until 9 o'clock that night and then put all worries out of his head and fell asleep at once. It seemed only a moment later when he woke, but he knew by the light and the feel of things that he had timed his sleep exactly. Man, I need an alarm clock to wake up. I couldn't just get up at a certain time. He got up, put on his helmet and turban. He'd slept in his mail shirt, and then he shook the other two till they woke up. They looked, to tell the truth, very gray and dismal as they climbed out of their bunks, and there was a good deal of yawning. "Now," said Tyrion, "we go due north from here. By good fortune, 'tis a starry night, and it will be much shorter than our journey this morning, for then we went round about, but now we will go straight. If we are challenged, then do you two hold your peace, and I will do my best to talk like a cursed, cruel, proud lord of Calorman. If I draw my sword, then thou, Eustace, must do likewise, and let Jill leap behind us and stand with an arrow on the string. But if I cry, 'Home!' then fly for the tower, both of you, and let none try to fight on, not even one stroke, after I've given the retreat. Such false valor has spoiled many notable plans in the wars. And now, friends, in the name of Aslan, let us go forward." Okay, let's talk about how he said something here. If we are challenged, then do you too hold your peace. Usually when we start with do, we're asking a question like, do you think this? But in the old days, when they used the word do like that, it was emphasis that you should do this. Now, you do go do your homework right now. You do go clean your room. It's just to make sure that they hear. It's like, this is important, pay attention. So, out they went into the cold night. All the great northern stars were burning above the treetops. The North Star of that world is called the Spearhead, and it's brighter than our pole star. For a time, they could go straight toward the Spearhead, but presently they came to a dense thicket so that they had to go out of their course to get round it. And after that, for they were still overshadowed by branches, it was hard to pick up their bearings. It was Jill who set them right again. She had been an excellent guide in England, and of course she knew her Narnian stars perfectly, having traveled so much in the wild northern lands, and she could work out the direction from other stars even when the Spearhead was hidden. As soon as Tyrion saw that she was the best pathfinder of the three of them, he put her in front. And then he was also astonished to find how silently and almost invisibly she glided on before them. Jill is the best at this, and so Tyrion, being a very wise king, put her in charge of it. He did not say, "She's a girl. She can't read a map. She can't find directions." He just saw that she could, and then he let her do it. That is a very good king. "By the Main," Tyrion whispered to Eustace, "this girl is a wondrous wood maid. If she had Dryad's blood in her, she could scarce do better." "She's so small, that's what helps," whispered Eustace. But Jill from in front said, "Shh, less noise. She's in charge right now." All round them the wood was very quiet. Indeed, it was far too quiet. On an ordinary Narnian night, there ought to have been noises, an occasional cheery "good night" from a hedgehog, the cry of an owl overhead, perhaps a flute in the distance to tell of fauns dancing, or some throbbing, hammering noises from the dwarfs underground. But all that was silenced. Gloom and fear reigned over Narnia. After a time, they began to go steeply uphill, and the trees grew further apart. Tyrion could dimly make out the well-known hilltop and the stable. Jill was now going with more and more caution. She kept on making signs to the others with her hand to do the same. Then she stopped, dead still. And Tyrion saw her gradually sink down into the grass and disappear without a sound. A moment later, she rose again, put her mouth close to Tyrion's ear, and said in the lowest possible whisper, "Get down, thee better." She said "thee" for "see," not because she had a lisp, but she knew that the hissing letter S is the part of a whisper that's most likely to be overheard. There they are, all getting down low so they can see. Tyrion at once lay down, almost as silently as Jill, but not quite, for he was heavier and older. And once they were down, he saw how from that position you could see the edge of a hill sharp against the star-strewn sky. Two black shapes rose against it. One was the stable, and the other, a few feet in front of it, was a Calorman sentry, so a guard. He was keeping very ill watch. He wasn't even walking or standing, but just sitting with his spear over his shoulder and his chin on his chest. "Well done," said Tyrion to Jill. She had shown him exactly what he needed to know. They got up, and Tyrion now took the lead. Very slowly, hardly daring to breathe, they made their way up to a little clump of trees, which was not more than 40 feet away from the sentinel. "Wait here till I come back," he whispered to the other two. "If I miscarry, if something goes wrong, fly." And then he sauntered out boldly in full view of the enemy. The man started when he saw him, and he was just going to jump to his feet. He was afraid that Tyrion might be one of his own officers, and that he would get into trouble for sitting down. But before he could get up, Tyrion had dropped on one knee beside him, saying, "Art thou a warrior of the Tisrocs? May he live forever. It cheers my heart to meet thee among all these beasts and devils of Narnians. Give me thy hand, friend." He's totally play acting. Before he well knew what was happening, the Calorman sentry found his right hand seized in a mighty grip. Next instant, someone was kneeling on his legs, and a dagger was pressed against his neck. "One noise, and thou art dead," said Tyrion in his ear. Tell me where the unicorn is, and thou shalt live. So he's not killing him or hurting him. He's just trying to get information about Jewel. Behind the stable, oh my master, stammered the unfortunate man. Good, said Tyrion. Rise up and lead me to him. As the man got up, the point of the dagger never left his neck. It only traveled round, cold and rather ticklish, as Tyrion got behind him, and then he settled it at a convenient place just under his ear. Tremblingly, he went around to the back of the stable. Though it was dark, Tyrion could see the white shape of Jewel at once. Hush, he said. No, don't neigh. Yes, Jewel, it is I. How have they tied thee? Hobbled by all four legs and tied with a bridle to a ring in the stable wall, came Jewel's voice. Stand here, sentry, with your back to the wall. So, yes. Now, Jewel, set the point of your horn against this Calorman's breast. With a good will, sire, said Jewel. If he moves, rive him to the heart. But they aren't going to hurt him. I don't think they will, unless he tries to hurt them first. Then, in a few seconds, Tyrion cut all the ropes. With the remains of them, he bound the sentry hand and foot, and finally he made him open his mouth, stuffed it full of grass, and tied him up from scalp to chin, like this, so that he could make no noise. He lowered the man into a sitting position and set him against the wall. I've done thee some discourtesy, soldier, said Tyrion, but such was my need. If we meet again, I may happen to do thee a better turn. Now, Jewel, let us go softly. He put his left arm round the beast's neck and bent and kissed his nose, and both had great joy. Well, of course they did. If someone had taken your unicorn and you were finally getting it back, wouldn't you be so excited? They went back as quietly as possible to the place where he had left the children. It was darker in there under the trees, and he nearly ran into Eustace before he saw him. All's well, whispered Tyrion. A good night's work. Now, for home, meaning the tower. They turned and had gone a few paces when Eustace said, Where are you, Pole? There was no answer. Is Jill on the other side of you, sire? He asked. What? Said Tyrion. Is she not on the other side of you? It was a terrible moment. They dared not shout, but they whispered her name in the loudest whisper they could manage, and there was no reply. Did she go away from you while I was away? Asked Tyrion. I didn't see or hear her go, said Eustace, but she could have gone without my knowing. She can be as quiet as a cat. You've seen for yourself. At that moment, a far-off drumbeat was heard. Jewel moved his ears forward. Dwarfs, he said. And treacherous dwarfs, enemies, as likely as not, muttered Tyrion. And here comes something on hoofs, much nearer, said Jewel. The two humans and the unicorn stood dead still. There were now so many different things to worry about that they didn't know what to do. The noise of the hoofs came steadily nearer, and then, quite close to them, a voice whispered, Hello, are you all there? Thank heavens it was Jill's voice. Where the devil have you been to? Said Eustace, in a furious whisper, for he'd been very frightened. Sometimes when you're afraid for someone, you sound angry, but you're just afraid. In the stable, gasped Jill, but it was the sort of gasp you give when you're struggling with suppressed laughter. Oh, growled Eustace, you think it funny, do you? Well, all I can say is... Have you got Jewel, sire? Asked Jill. Yes, here he is. What is that beast with you? That's him, said Jill. But let's be off home before anyone wakes up. And again there came little explosions of laughter from Jill. The others obeyed at once, for they'd already lingered long enough in that dangerous place, and the dwarf drums seemed to have come a little nearer. It was only after they'd been walking southward for several minutes that Eustace said, Got Him? What do you mean? The false Aslan, said Jill. What? Said Tyrion. Where have you been, and what have you done? Well, sire, said Jill, as soon as I saw that you'd got the sentry out of the way, I thought, hadn't I better have a look inside the stable and see what really is there? So I crawled along. It was as easy as anything to draw the bolt. Of course, it was pitch black inside, and it smelled like any other stable. Then I struck a light, and would you believe it? There was nothing at all there but this old donkey with a bundle of lion skin tied onto his back. So I drew my knife and told him he'd have to come along with me. As a matter of fact, I needn't have threatened him with a knife at all. He was very fed up with the stable and quite ready to come. Weren't you puzzled, dear? Great Scott, said Eustace. Well, I'm jiggered. I was jolly angry with you a moment ago, and I still think it was mean of you to sneak off without the rest of us. But I must admit, it was a perfectly gorgeous thing to do. If she was a boy, she'd have to be knighted, wouldn't she, sire? If she was a boy, said Tyrion, she'd be whipped for disobeying orders. And in the dark, no one could see whether he said this with a frown or a smile. Next minute, there was a sound of rasping metal. What are you doing, sire? Asked Jewel sharply. Drawing my sword to smite off the head of that accursed ass, said Tyrion in a terrible voice. Stand clear, girl. Oh, don't, please don't, said Jill. Really, you mustn't. It wasn't his fault. It was all the ape. He didn't know any better, and he's very sorry. He's a nice donkey. His name is Puzzle, and I've got my arms around his neck. She's protecting him. Jill, said Tyrion, you are the bravest and most woodwise of all my subjects, but also the most malapert and disobedient. Well, let the ass live. What have you to say for yourself? Me, sire? Came the donkey's voice. I'm sure I'm very sorry if I've done wrong. The ape said Aslan wanted me to dress up like that, and I thought he'd know. I'm not clever like him. I only did what I was told. It wasn't any fun for me living in that stable. I don't even know what's been going on outside. He never let me out except for a minute or two at night. Some days they forgot to give me any water, too. Sire, said Jewel, those dwarfs are coming nearer and nearer. Do we want to meet them? Tyrion thought for a moment and then suddenly gave a great laugh out loud. Then he spoke, not this time in a whisper. By the lion, he said, I am growing slow-witted. Meet them? Certainly we will meet them. We will meet anyone now. We have this ass to show them. Let them see the thing that they have feared and bowed to. We can show them the truth of the ape's vile plot. His secret is out. The tide is turned. Tomorrow we shall hang that ape on the highest tree in Narnia, and no more whispering and skulking and disguises. Where are these honest dwarfs? We have good news for them. When they'd been whispering for hours, the mere sound of anyone talking out loud had a wonderfully stirring effect. The whole party began talking and laughing. Even Puzzle lifted up his head and gave a grand, well, this is a donkey sound. Hee-haw, hee-haw. I don't know how to do it. A thing the ape hadn't allowed him to do for days. And then they set off in the direction of the drumming. It grew steadily louder, and soon they could see torchlight as well. There they are walking, and that's a silhouette where it just shows the outline of them. Oh, it's so fun that the unicorn is there, isn't it? And doesn't Jewel the donkey just look crazy? They call him an ass because ass is another word for donkey. Otherwise, you never use that word. But if you're calling a donkey that, you can, because that's what they are. I mean, you could also just say donkey. So the drumming grows steadily louder, and now they can see torchlight. They came out on one of those rough roads. We should hardly even call them a road at all in England, which ran through Lantern Waste. And there, marching sturdily along, were about 30 dwarfs, all with their little spades and mattocks over their shoulders. 2 armed calormans led the column, and 2 more brought up the rear. So they're being guarded by soldiers. enemy soldiers on the front and back. "Stay," thundered Tyrion as he stepped out on the road. "Stay, soldiers. Whither do you lead these Narnian dwarfs, and by whose orders?" Oh my goodness. That's the end of the chapter. I thought there'd be something more. So they've stopped the Calorman soldiers who have all of these dwarfs that they're taking someplace and soldiers in the back. And now we'll find out what happens. But now they know that it's not the real Aslan. It's just Jewel in a lion skin. So it feels like things might go better. All right, that's chapter 6.